The whole fabric of the blockhouse shook as the mass of thralls ploughed into the gate, and the tide of lupines began clawing their way up the sides of the wooden structure. All around the ramparts, Theodora's retinue and the Holtwick militia began to loose their arrows. Soon the whimpers of dead and dying lupines mingled with the savage battle cries. Still they came. Torben lunged forward and thrust his spear into the chest of one beast whose head and upper body had crested the parapet and who was close to climbing over the wooden barricade. It tried to maintain its hold on the woodwork, its claws scrabbling desperately, sending up splinters of wood and sawdust, but then it tumbled down to the ground and out of sight. Torben tightened the grip on his spear as he saw the clawed hands of another lupine immediately replacing its comrade he had just driven off the side of the building. He took a step back and gritted his teeth, ready to receive the foe as it vaulted over the parapet. Its feet had barely touched the wooden boards before it was thrown back, its throat a bloodied mess, ruined by one of Elusia's crossbow bolts. "We need to keep them off the roof, Torben!" Elusia shouted, moving forward to tip the lupine's body off the roof. "The only advantage we have over them is that they're vulnerable whilst they're climbing." Torben nodded and dashed over to another section of the defences, where one of the militiamen was desperately trying to beat back two lupines that had nearly climbed up the wall and were threatening to pull him off. Stabbing down at the nearest, Torben managed to divert it enough that it let go of the man's tunic, but wasn't able to stop the other from heaving the helpless defender from his position. Torben shivered as he heard the man's screams turn into a crunching thud as he hit the ground, and the distraction was long enough to allow the first lupine to spring onto the roof. His thoughts snapping back to the task at hand, Torben punched his shield forwards, the boss smashing into the beast's face, making it recoil. He dropped his spear. He was too close to his adversary for it to be useful, and drew his short sword and closed the distance. Using his shield to pin the creature against the parapet stakes, he stabbed upwards several times. He could feel the creature's hot blood flowing over his hand and felt its weight slump fully onto his shield as its life ebbed away. Before he had time to think, another wolfish face appeared in his peripheral vision, arm raised to strike at him. He just about managed to raise his sword to meet the blow, but the strength of his opponent's strike blasted his arm out of the way. Fortunately, his parry had deflected the blow enough that the rusted, chipped blade skittered off his chainmail. He winced from the force of the blow, knowing he was badly bruised, and grunted in pain as he dragged his arm back to guard position. The lupine was already moving in for another attack, but as it thrust forward, its head snapped suddenly and unnaturally to the side, the skull caved in by a slingshot bullet. Torben stepped out of the way of its dying thrust and looked in the direction the bullet had come from. Gwilliam was standing astride the pinnacle of the sloped roof, his eyes already on another target, the sling in his hand making the air around it buzz. Gwilliam flicked his wrist skillfully, sending the sling bullet zipping through the air and smashing into a lupine's chest, not enough to lay it low, but enough to make it stagger back, giving the soldier before it time to drive his sword into its belly. As he readied his sling to fire again, Gwilliam surveyed the area before him. His location gave him an ideal point of observation on the whole roof, allowing him to pick his targets much more strategically, but it also meant that he could see clearly how fragile their situation was.